Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here, listening to a little bit of my story, our story. It's a wonderful opportunity to share with you just an amazing journey, but then also why we have come to oppose the legalization of assisted suicide. And I want to start with asking you a question. If you listen to this talk today, you go home and you had a nice day, good lobbying, good discussion with a lot of different legislators, but then you start to feel strange, something's going on, and you kind of hold off on it a little bit. You say, all right, well, maybe I'll go to the doctor in a couple weeks. So you wait a couple of weeks, and then from there, you get to the point where you're like, wow, this is really not feeling well. What should I do? And ultimately, you get to the point where you say, I got to go to the doctor. You go to the doctor. Doctor says, there might be something wrong. It might just be a cold. We're not sure. We'll take some tests, and we'll get back to you. You go home, and all of a sudden, the doctor calls you back and says, you have to come in right away. So you immediately come back, and the doctor says to you, you have 4 months left to live. What would you do? How would you react to that type of question? Not only that you are going to die, but that there's nothing that you can do about it, and that it's going to be a slow and painful death. And that is the situation that we dealt with. The unexpected happened. I was down in Florida. As you heard, I had worked here in New York State for a number of years, worked in state government, worked in local government. Ultimately, we transitioned into the private sector to work down with a friend of mine who I'd known here from upstate New York. And while I was down there, I was at a meeting with some colleagues, and all of a sudden I started to feel what was most similar to intense anxiety. And I didn't really know what was going on, and all of a sudden I had to tell them, I said, guys, you need to call 911, something is going wrong with me. And that's really the last thing I remember. I suffered what is called a grand mal seizure. They took me to the hospital. Next thing I could remember was being awoken. They were doing a number of tests. They didn't quite know what was wrong with me. By that time, my wife, Chris, who's here with me today, showed up, and she said, well, we want to have an MRI done. They said, well, all the tests we've done so far look okay. And my wife said, all right, I appreciate that you said that, but I don't care. I want to have an MRI done. They said, well, it's going to be really expensive based on your insurance plan. And again, she said, I don't care what the cost is. We want an MRI done. I could not fight for myself at this point, and she helped fight for me. And so they did the MRI. A couple days went by. We heard nothing. Doctor came in and said, all right, we're gonna release you. Everything looks good. And she said, well, how'd the MRI go? And they said, well, no one came and talked to you? I said, no one came and talked to us. I said, oh, well, I'll be right back. So 15 minutes later, the doctor walked back in and said, you have 2 lesions on your left temporal lobe. It could be an infection, but likely it's cancer. Wow. Just a life-changing event when you're told that you have 2 tumors in your left temporal lobe. So they went forward with a biopsy because they had to know what type of cancer it actually was. They came back and they told us the worst-case scenario, that it was grade 4 glioblastoma multiforme, GBM. GBM is one of the worst forms of brain cancer that you can get. Typically, someone who has GBM has 70% of them will pass away within the first year, 90% will pass away within 3 years. They told me that it was inoperable. They gave me an original prognosis of 4 months left to live. In a best-case scenario, I could get possibly a year. What an amazing and incredible thing to hear, to be told, and to be sent home and told that there's nothing you can do. So we went out and we had to make a decision. Were we going to fight this? Were we going to go out and try and get second opinions, get third opinions? What were we going to do? So we did. We went out and got a second opinion, and the first doctor said, well, we can operate, but it's going to be a very difficult operation. We'll have to keep you awake for it. So we said, let's go out and get a third opinion. We went out and got the third opinion, and the third opinion that was up here in New York. It was Memorial Sloan Kettering. The doctor there was wonderful. He said, JJ, we do 3 of these a day. We got it. We'll do the surgery. He said, but I don't like you very much, so I'm going to have my assistant do it for me. And I said, all right, well, it's fine by me. So we went forward. We got the surgery, and they removed 2 of the tumors that were visible, and not only that, they found a third tumor while they were in there. And they removed about 99%, which for GBM is a very high statistic amount to remove. It was a very good surgery. Unfortunately, the recovery post-surgery did not go very well. It was actually a fairly difficult recovery. I ended up going through a total of 9 seizures during my recovery, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. And as a result of those seizures, I lost all of my basic cognitive ability. I lost the ability to walk, to talk, to read, to write. Now you see me up here, I look fairly well. At that time, you wouldn't have understood me if I was trying to speak to you. Right now, I'm down to a low weight of about 170 pounds. At that point, I was up to about 220. I was very ill, and I was not doing too well. But we continued to fight. We researched what was available, what was out there for us. We found a clinical trial study drug called MK-1775. We got into that program and wanted to take that. Went through radiation, went through chemotherapy, changed every aspect of my life, taking an integrative oncology approach, and just wanted to extend my life however long that I could. I didn't know how much time that I have, and even today I don't know how much time that I have. GBM is a very difficult form of brain cancer. It could come back. Hopefully it won't, but we will continue to fight and try and help others fight this same disease. So what happened? Month 5. In month 5, there was a very difficult point in this journey. Now, prior to month 5, I was doing fairly well. I knew the situation, I knew the circumstances, but we were motivated. I wanted to fight. However, month 5 was different. This is when I was taking that clinical trial drug that I was telling you about. It mixed with my chemotherapy drug. It made me very ill. At the same time, I got sick. I couldn't get out of bed for 4 weeks, could barely walk. My cognitive ability had reduced. My family and I, including my wife, we were having a difficult time emotionally. And this is when depression actually hit me. This is when it became extremely difficult. And at that point in time, I had to ask myself the question, is this worth the pain? Is this worth the challenge that I'm going through? Now, ultimately, I made the decision at that point to say, we have to keep fighting. But at the same time, I was reading a book, and it was a very important book in this transition called Love, Medicine, and Miracles. It's written by Dr. Bernie Siegel, who's a Yale professor and also a surgeon. And in that book, he broke down those who are facing a terminal illness into 3 categories. First, the top 20%, and I consider myself in this group. These are the fighters. No matter what, they're going to go out there and try and find whatever opportunity they can to find. They're going to try everything they can. They're going to be committed to surviving. But then in the bottom 20%, you have those who say, for whatever reason, it might be that they're naturally at the end of life, and they say, okay, I've had enough and I don't want to fight. But then you have the 60%, and this is what worried me. The 60% in the middle, they don't know what to do. They're waiting for a doctor to give them advice. They're waiting for a family member to help them. They're waiting for a friend to tell them how it went for them. And then they're being influenced by that. And at the same time as this, I became aware of a young woman named Brittany Menard, who is going through the exact same type of brain cancer that I was. And everything that I read at this point in time, everything that I saw, gave me the message that you can't beat this. You can't beat GBM. You can't survive. And she became an advocate for the legalization of assisted suicide. And I saw this as a great danger for those of us who wanted to continue for as long as possible to fight. Every single day that I had, regardless of the potential pain, was another day that I could have with my wife, another day that I could have with my son, another day that I could have with my family. And for someone to take that away from me, I saw as something that was very difficult for me to accept. So that got me involved in the issue. So you ask yourself the question, why fight assisted suicide? Why get involved in this particular issue? As you heard, I worked for 2 Democratic governors. What would really bring me into this issue and get me interested? Well, this is important. I was told not only once, but I was told by 3 separate doctors that I could not live very long. And as you can see, all 3 of those doctors were wrong. So this brings one of the key points to the arguments against this issue. Doctors can be wrong. Now, I'm sure that we have some doctors in the audience, and I'm sure that they could tell you that. They are human beings, just like you, just like me. And people make mistakes. It's not intended. They're working very hard. But doctors can make mistakes. Approximately 15% of Americans will receive an incorrect diagnosis or a bad prognosis. 15%. So when you go to your community hospital in upstate New York, and you don't have access to the top medical facility like Memorial Sloan Kettering, and you receive that diagnosis, and you don't have the income to go out and get a second and third opinion, and someone tells you that you have GBM and that there's nothing you can do, what is the average person going to do in that situation? They're going to accept it, and that removes the hope. This brings me to my second key thing that brought me into this issue. You have a loss of medical research as a result of this. You take GBM, that's my disease, so I use it often as a case example, but there's multiple different diseases that you can use an example of this. The way that people will get through this is by finding a cure, and that's where our medical resources should be going. But when you tell people, about 10 to 12,000 people a year get diagnosed with GBM, but when you tell them that there's nothing that they can do, and they lose hope and they don't want to fight, you lose that ability to conduct that research. So say if you lose a third out of that 12,000 due to assisted suicide legalization. So now you have that fewer people that are taking part in these type of clinical trial studies. So what happens when you have less people taking part? You have less financial resources going into this research. When you have less financial research, or less financial resources going to that research, you have less of the top doctors in the country going to look into these areas trying to find a cure. So these terminal diseases, which we're doing a great deal of research on today, will lose that ability to conduct research, taking the lives of many people who otherwise could have survived. So this isn't an issue about someone's individual autonomy or their individual choice. The thing that is different here is that you are not only affecting yourself, you are affecting other people. And just something that's different from the way we perceive this is I look around at the audience here and I see a very mixed number of people in terms of their age. I see a lot of young people, I see a lot of middle-aged people, I see a lot of elderly people, and it looks pretty like a mixed room, and that's great to see. Because the key point here is that this is no longer an issue of just the elderly facing the end of life. If you look straight back from where I'm looking right now, and everyone looked to the right side, my right side, your left side of the room, that half of the room, 50% of America will have cancer in their lifetime, whether they are young, middle-aged, or old. 50% in this country. That's the latest estimate. That is significant, and it's something we need to be concerned about. And assisted suicide is not the solution. It just creates and adds to the problem. The third item here is that there are a number of other end-of-life options: palliative care, planning, other items. The problem here is that there are some problems when we look at palliative care for a very small statistic. But instead of giving assisted suicide as the new alternative, we should be looking at making sure that every single resident of New York State has good quality palliative care. That is the answer to the problem, not saying that you can't get through this and you need to end your life. One of the key items that I've learned about this issue is insurance coverage. All right, everyone is familiar with this. If I asked you to, you don't have to do this, but if I asked every single one of you how comfortable you were that your insurance company would be out there fighting for you every day to make sure that you had the best quality of care, and they were going to check in on you, and they were going to advocate for you, they were going to fight for you, I would say I would have probably 3 people raise their hand, and they probably work for the insurance company that they're raising their hand for. There's a great quote here that I like to share. Hemlock Society. The Hemlock Society was an organization created in the 1970s, and they were one of the leaders of full-scale euthanasia. They ultimately ended up merging with Compassionate Choices. Compassionate Choices is now the leading organization pushing forward assisted suicide. And Hemlock Society's founder had said, "Economics, not the quest for broadened individual liberties or increased autonomy, will drive assisted suicide to the plateau of acceptable practice." That was Derek Humphrey. He says it flat out. This is about the finances. When you have a situation, take my personal case example. If an insurance company had the ability to make a decision, now they're a business, they could fund the $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 annual cost of my chemotherapy, or they can fund the $300 assisted suicide pills. What do you think they will select? Doesn't take an incredible amount of thought to figure this out. And so there's only one demographic within our society that's going to be able to fight back on that. It's going to be the upper, middle class, and upper class, a small demographic of our society. The average person who's working, minorities, the elderly, those who are at risk are the ones who are going to they're not going to have a choice. They're going to be told by their doctor and by their insurance company what they can do. Two case examples of this, a woman named Barbara Wagner and a gentleman named Randy Stroop. Early on in the beginning of this program out in the state of Oregon, when they legalized it, that's where it's been legalized the longest, they received letters from their insurance system, which was run through the state, that told them they would not be able to receive their normal standard of care treatment, but they would be eligible to receive assisted suicide pills. Two reported cases of this happening. This became very wide-known public news when this happened. After that, the insurance provider stopped sending out those types of letters. So there's two reports of that actually happening. How many more have happened in that state since this being legalized that we don't know about? Again, who loses here? Who are the most vulnerable? Who are the people that are going to be at need? It's going to be the people who are working. When you look at upstate New York, you already have strong economic problems. When you look at downstate New York, you have economic risks. You have people just working to put food on their table. Are they going to be able to go out and fight an insurance company? Are they going to be able to go out and get second and third opinions when they're told that they have no options? No. And the only thing that assisted suicide does is raise that issue and raise that problem and raise that risk. This isn't about one person's pain. This is about ending people's lives who don't want to die. The last item is the mental health issue here. One of the key issues, or one of the many important issues here in New York State is suicide, trying to prevent additional suicide. And with that issue, you have increasing suicide rates amongst children, teenagers. You also have increasing suicide rates amongst veterans and a lot of key groups within the state of New York. So a recent study done by the Southern Medical Journal showed that suicide rates in the 3 states where assisted suicide was legal the longest, they've had an 8% increase in general suicide rates. 8% suicide increase. This is a fundamental change in the social norm. Suicide becomes normal. It becomes acceptable, whether it's related to pain and illness, or whether it's due to depression, or whether it's just because someone wants to end their life. That becomes the acceptable norm. So let's not, you can call this whatever you want. You can call it compassion and choices. You can call it death with dignity. You can put any pretty buzzword that you want on this issue. But at the end of the day, this is suicide. And it will hurt other people. It's not just one person. One of the key items here that I have from my own personal experience is something that I mentioned early on. It's the issue of depression. According to this legislation, you can be reviewed if you have signals, you give signals to your doctor of being depressed at the time you request the pills. So you go to your doctor when you receive your diagnosis, you say, I want to have these pills, so I have this option to kill myself. The doctor can evaluate. It doesn't have to say you have depression issues, but if they do, then you can go get treatment or be reviewed. In my case, when I would have been at that point in this decision-making process, I was doing quite well. I was motivated. I wanted to fight. I was doing everything I could. We were doing research. That wasn't the problem. I would have received those pills if that's what I'd wanted. But in month 5, I was depressed. There were a lot of difficult things. I was in a lot of physical pain. I didn't know what the outcome of this disease was going to be. And I did ask myself the question of how I wanted to move forward on this issue, how I wanted to move forward with that pain. And ultimately, I made the right choice, the right decision for myself. I'm one of the strong ones. What happens when that middle 60% goes through that same thing and they have those pills right next to them? They will give their life because of a short-term bad situation when otherwise they could have lived, taking their life away from them. That is the issue, and no one's checking on them. No doctor is coming to follow up with them. There's no one there to support them. There's no oversight of this legislation. There's no one there to check in. They're just on their own. And when they hit that depressive state, there's no treatment to help them. That becomes the grave danger of this legislation and why it should not be legal. So I've told you a little bit about our story, and I hope that it helps you understand some of the key issues with this particular legislation. As someone who has spoken to a lot of other patients with a terminal disease and spoken to them when they are potentially at the end of life and gone through a similar situation that they're going through, I can tell you that the overwhelming majority of the patients that I've spoken to, they don't believe that this is good for them. They don't believe that this will help them. They don't believe that there is a positive outcome for them in this particular issue. They're scared. They're concerned. And the only thing that this legislation will do will increase that fear. It will take away an opportunity for them to survive. And I would leave you with this simple question. Is one person's decision or choice or perception of choice to avoid a potential for a very short amount of potential pain or being a burden upon their family, or whatever idea they have for why they think this is important, is one person's idea of that worth the loss of hundreds of lives? I would say no. Thank you.